Christmas, a light on the tree. Christmas, I'm watching. What the fuck? That's a nice picture. I'm watching them shine. Christmas, you should be watching me. Back! Get the fuck back home. Okay, so you get an immediate F. Sorry, I'll say that a little bit nicer for those of you who have no hearing anymore. You get an immediate F on this grade. I immediately commented, "Stop lying." Derek, I need you to understand. This is with love. It's not okay for you to keep communicating as a scientist if you're going to keep saying stuff like this. What did he say? Let's watch.
In 1935, Einstein came up with a thought experiment that showed quantum mechanics breaks one of the most sacred principles in physics, that nothing can go faster than the speed of light. Physicists assumed he was wrong. They thought that at 56, Einstein was an old man past his prime and just unable to accept the new theory of physics because it was too radical. But 30 years later, one man stumbled across Einstein's forgotten paper when he realized something. The prediction could actually be tested. When scientists ran the experiment, they were shocked. Quantum physics really does break the universal speed limit.
We're obliged to invoke something like actions going faster than light from one place to another.
You guys are hippies.
This is a video about one of the spookiest and most misunderstood experiments in all
I will slap you.
of physics. And it might even be the strongest evidence we have that we live in many worlds.
You've gone off the rails. I'm not anti-theory. I'm not anti all of this other stuff. I'm just saying you don't even know how you've already made a video talking about the electromagnetic field being the thing that makes waves in wires to send electricity. You made that video! Veritasium! Derek! 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 Derek. You made the video about electricity being sent by the EM field having a wave in it. Nothing to do solely with electrons, but an EM field wave. Let that sink into your head for a few seconds. Realize the wave that is caused in... We'll get there.
If the sun were to disappear all of a sudden, how long would it take until we noticed and were released out into space?
Because I'm already 5 minutes in.
Says that gravity acts instantly across any distance. So if there's a change in gravity, we should feel it immediately. But Newton himself was disturbed by this. That one body may act upon another at a distance is to me so great an absurdity that I believe no man who has a competent faculty of thinking can ever fall into it. But in 1905, Einstein realized action at a distance isn't just absurd, it leads to outright paradoxes. Einstein had discovered that observers moving at different speeds can disagree about when events happened.
I have been over the time of 2 lightning strikes on the other side of a goddamn train station video that I've seen. They talk about this. And that is because the one who is literally moving, and if they're not compensating for their own speed, yeah, you'll get miscalculations. It doesn't mean that they're going to have disagreements. They just have different ways of finding the information. You have to compensate for your speed. Some people think that if you're going at light speed or something, that you're going to see everything else as approaching you at the speed of light, but you're not moving. This is stupid! If you're moving at any crazy speeds, it's you moving, pushing away everything else. Everything else didn't suddenly accelerate, only you did. So thinking that reference frames can be interchangeable, that there's no difference between it, there's no difference between it when it comes to a collision, for example, perhaps, whether it's coming towards you or you're coming towards it. But reality, you're moving towards it. But also the double lightning thing, there are two strikes of lightning, right? One on one side, one on the other side. And there's someone in the middle. They can know the lightning happened simultaneously, if it did happen simultaneously, because they know the distance, the time it takes for the signal to get to them, and the measurements if they did measurements correctly. However, there's a more vast way of doing multiple measurements, and then you would have all sorts of data, and you could corroborate, and then you would have an understanding of what actually took place. But if you're moving, you have to compensate for you moving, because the signal is going maybe away from you, and you have to know how much that rate is. And if you're moving fast enough, you'll never know it happened. So that doesn't mean that you're noticing events happening at different times. You're noticing the event happening and reconciling it in your head at a different time, but it happened at one moment. There is no difference. It doesn't matter who witnesses it. Just because you can't reconcile it happening, yeah, that's because you're already ahead of the pressure wave or whatever else. You're going faster than the speed of light, or at the speed of light. Light can't catch up to you, so you won't see the flash of the lightning. Moving on.
Let's say you see two things happen at the same time. An observer speeding past would see it differently.
I just said this! I didn't even watch this part of the video. I skipped to the freaking part of the double slit, because that's when I got pissed off. This is over. I just said that.
And both points of view are equally valid.
No!
But in the case of
they're not equally valid! Say it again!
Just absurd. It leads to outright paradoxes. Einstein had discovered that observers moving at different speeds can disagree about when events happened. Let's say you see two things happen at the same time. An observer speeding past would see it differently. To them, one of these happened first, and both...
No! To them, they would have different calculations to find out when things happened, but they would not see it as it happening simultaneously unless you're not doing any actual empirical work. Then, yeah, you're going to get it wrong. But to someone who can actually say that they have a correct reference frame that isn't bullshit, you're not going to get it wrong. Do the math!
Points of view are equally valid.
No!
But in the case of gravity, this leads to disaster. Say you see the sun disappearing and Earth flying off at the same time, as Newton predicted. Then the other observer sees something impossible.
Listen, the only reason why you would assume that the gravity force and everything else is because when you swing around a wire and you let it go, the local effect and the action of it going flying away, like any slingshot or whatever, very local, very relatively close, and it's hard to figure out what happens at those super distances of 8 light minutes away, because there's no experience with that. So who cares what they got wrong back then?
They see the Earth flying off first, even while the sun is still there, and it should, of course, be pulling the Earth in. So to them, it looks like...
Listen, I'm not saying that Newton was a plebeian or some idiot. I'm saying that he didn't he may not have been able to consider that, yeah, it takes 8 minutes for light to get to us, or whatever. Maybe it will also take a certain amount of time for gravity to take effect. Who knows? So many people thought that light was instantaneous. We then figured out that it took a certain amount of time. I don't remember when that exactly took place, that we figured that out with some candles on mountains. But we figured it out.
Cause and effect are reversed. The only way out of this paradox is to reject the assumption we started with, so gravity can't be instant. It took Einstein 10 years to fix this issue, and in the process he completely overhauled our understanding of gravity. Gravity is caused by the bending of space-time. When there's a change in gravity, that only affects the local space-time, and then that ripple spreads out to nearby regions, which spread farther out until eventually they reach us. This theory of gravity is local because effects spread from place to place at the speed of light instead of being instant. From our frame of reference, if the sun disappeared, that ripple would take about 8 minutes to reach us.
Would it, or would it be the speed of sound? We don't know. We can do math and figure out. We can do calculations. We can do experiments and find out. Okay, sure. Whatever.
Another observer might disagree about the length of the delay, but now we all agree that the sun disappeared first. This is why nothing can go faster than light. The delay between cause and effect ensures all observers agree on the order. After Einstein
I don't fucking care about agreeing on the order. I've seen videos where they mixed it up and whatever else, blah, blah, blah. It was weird. And the order can be misunderstood if, for example, somehow oh, frick, I don't remember. No, okay, someone said it could be misunderstood. I think it can't actually be. We'll skip this
gravity,
for
all
now.
of classical physics obeyed this important rule. But then Einstein studied the new theory of quantum mechanics and made a terrible discovery. This is one of the most famous photographs in physics. It was taken at the 1927 Solvay conference, where the architects of the brand new quantum theory gathered to discuss it. Around 60% of the attendees would win Nobel Prizes, but Einstein thought they'd gotten something fundamentally wrong, and this was his chance to prove it. So he took to the stage with a thought experiment. Imagine you fire a single electron through a narrow slit toward a circular detector.
Everyone wants to just bandwagon on the double slit experiment and get it wrong every freaking time. Every time. At this point, I'm just outing you for lying. Because you know how the electromagnetic field works. That is the wavy thing that electrons interact with. So you know that. So if you're shooting an electron, what's really happening is the electromagnetic field makes the interference pattern as it flows through the double slit and then is interfered with by an observer beam. So you end up with no interference and you end up with the electron still going through.
Screen. Well, quantum mechanics says that this electron has some sort of wave associated with it.
Because they're stupid! It doesn't! It has electromagnetic field influence. It doesn't have its own waviness.
Called a wave function, which spreads out.
If you're going to talk about his old theory, okay, you can talk about his old theory. It's wrong.
Through space as it travels. When the electron hits the screen, you detect it at a single point. Where it turns up depends on the amplitude of the wave. If the wave is very big in a particular area, the electron is more likely to turn up there. Let's say it.
Again, you're not even saying interference pattern. You're not describing it as the thing. We've already talked about this a few times. Derek.
Appears here. So far, everyone was following. This is what quantum mechanics predicts. But Einstein's next question surprised them. Why doesn't the electron turn up at this other spot a moment later? There's only one electron, so we can't detect it twice. But the way quantum mechanics ensures this is that when the electron was detected at the first spot, its
That's a lie.
wave function collapsed to zero everywhere else instantly.
That's a complete hippie lie.
That's why the probability of finding it at the second spot is now zero. There's no
$20,000, you are wrong.
longer any wave there.
No, actually, fuck you. $1 trillion, you're wrong. Trillion. Easy $1 trillion that you are wrong. I will be a slave for the rest of my life. You are wrong. I don't care. And if you find out that I am right, that the electron is just a little dot bar magnet as we know it to be, and the electromagnetic field does the waviness, which is what pushes it in the direction that it can go. And then based on exact trajectory, that's where it ends up in the interference pattern made by the EM field. I don't want to say a insult of any kind. I don't care if I said it before. Flat out, just wrong.
But Einstein asked the audience to think about what this means. The measurement here must instantly affect the wave function over here, no matter how far apart these locations are.
That's a bad assessment of everything. And it's old and outdated. And people like you have made more recent videos.
In other words, quantum mechanics requires instant influences across distance. It violates locality. Einstein concluded his talk by saying, "This is an entirely peculiar mechanism of action at a distance, and that this implies to my mind a contradiction with the postulate of relativity." Einstein's argument was so simple.
Did he even say any of that? Action at a distance was about quantum entanglement particles, nothing to do with the double-slit experiment whatsoever. You're adding on to history. What are you anymore?
And his talk so short,
are you slop?
Didn't know what to make of it. One audience member said, "I feel myself in a very difficult position because I don't understand what precisely is the point which Einstein wants to make. No doubt it is my fault." That man was Niels Bohr, the most influential figure in quantum physics at the time. Bohr's institute in Copenhagen had become the hub for the new field. Dozens of young scientists like Werner Heisenberg came to learn from him. As one of his disciples remembers, Bohr had invited a number of us to his home where we sat close to him, some literally at his feet on the floor, so as not to miss a word. Bohr wasn't the one who wrote the mathematical rules of quantum mechanics. Instead, he told everyone what they
Isn't that the guy from Men in Black?
meant. While others were confused by the theory, Bohr offered answers. His philosophy became known as the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics.
My general understanding of the Copenhagen interpretation is you have the wave function, it describes everything that you can know about
And it's false.
a particle or a system, and it evolves according to the Schrödinger equation, and at some point you're going to make a measurement, and at that point the wave function collapses.
I think that one bit of that you said was like, the wave function is all you can know about the particle. And I think that was like a pretty important point to Bohr.
As Bohr would put it, it's wrong to think that the task of physics is to find out how nature is.
The job of physics is just to predict measurements in the lab, which quantum mechanics does incredibly well. As for what the electron is doing when you're not looking,
What?
well, to Bohr, that question didn't even make sense to ask.
We know how to make snowflakes, dude. It's all about figuring out nature. What are you on about?
The wave function tells you everything physics can or should tell you.
You also don't understand that a atomic freaking particle of a freaking electron is going around the atom about a quadrillion times, which no one talks about, because if you simply take the number of 2.2 thousand kilometers per second, the speed of the orbit of the electron, and translate that into units of atomic widths per second, it's 22 quadrillion atomic width per second. Which is somewhere between 8 and 5 quadrillion orbits per second. It's why it looks like a blur. It looks like a blur because it's happening lots of times in the same instant. So no matter what picture you take, you're going to see echoes of the electron. You don't even get that. You just think it's some weird probability thing. You don't even understand the dynamics of the basics of it. for some reason. Because the simple math of how fast it's going relative to the distance of an orbit of an atom is beyond you somehow. I say that as a fact.
Einstein couldn't stand the Copenhagen interpretation. In a letter to his ally Schrödinger, he called it a tranquilizing philosophy, or religion. Einstein felt his experiment exposed
Copenhagen was wrong.
a critical weakness in the Copenhagen interpretation. He'd shown that the way the wave function collapses is non-local, and so he reasoned maybe the wave function is the problem. Maybe it's not the best way to describe the electron after all.
It's not, because there's also electromagnetism field around the electron, a separate thing. You know, the thing that's holding the electron to the proton in the orbit of the atom in the first place, that EM field, that thing that is the fundamental thing about most everything.
May not have convinced Bohr of this during his talk, but he was determined to do it during the rest of the conference.
Physicists tell a version of this story, that you will find in physics textbooks and in pop science books, and that, physicists tell amongst ourselves that what happened was Einstein and Bohr had a great debate, and Einstein was unhappy with quantum mechanics because it was fundamentally probabilistic. He tried to show that there were conceivable experiments that you could use to get around those uncertainty relations, and Bohr showed over and over and over again that you couldn't do that.
Yeah, because Bohr had a limited mind, and I'm already freaking there. I'm not even as old as Einstein when he was thinking about these things, and I've been thinking about them for years, and you've made the video saying you know about the EM field, and you still are getting this wrong. I'm confused at your mistake.
And eventually, everybody agreed with Bohr.
That's Adam Becker, author of What is Real, a great book about the history of quantum mechanics. As he explained to us, Bohr may have just misunderstood the purpose of Einstein's thought experiments. We have documented evidence of this in at least one case. Einstein described a thought experiment that involved a box of photons and a mirror. Its purpose was to show the non-locality of the Copenhagen interpretation in action.
Bohr just misunderstood it, and when he recounted it to others later on, he drew a little diagram of what Einstein's thought experiment setup was, and it just didn't have the mirror in it at all. And yet this is taken as like the great victory for Bohr over Einstein, which is crazy. But history is written by the victors, right?
To understand what Einstein was arguing for, think of the relationship between Newton's gravity and general relativity.
Wait, are you actually saying something right for once?
In that theory, gravity is a non-local force, leading to paradoxes. This was the motivation for coming up with Einstein's general relativity, which is local. Einstein believed the same logic applied to quantum mechanics. His thought experiment revealed that quantum theory is non-local, so just like with Newton's gravity, quantum mechanics must not be the final theory. There must be a local one that will replace it. And as a bonus, he thought this new theory might even unify gravity with the quantum world.
It would be hard to imagine coming to the final theory right away, and the fact that you can see paradoxes like this would make you think there's got to be more to it that we just don't have yet.
Absolutely.
But Einstein hadn't even persuaded Bohr that quantum mechanics really is non-local. So in 1935, he made one last attempt to convince the community that there was a contradiction between quantum mechanics and relativity. With the help of two younger colleagues, Boris Podolsky and Nathan Rosen, he formulated another, even more striking thought experiment that shows the non-locality of quantum mechanics. This paper is now known as the EPR paper, after its authors.
Right. Vaguely.
Here is a simplified version of their thought experiment. Imagine a single high-energy photon suddenly becomes two particles. One of them is an electron, and to conserve total charge, the other is a positron. Since one is negative and the other is positive, they cancel out. But both electrons
We already know that this is what happens. What are you talking about? Gamma rays.
and positrons have a property called spin, and like electric charge, this also needs to be conserved. If the light started out with zero spin, well then the two particles together must have zero total spin as well. For example, if the direction of the electron spin is this, the positron has to have spin in the opposite direction, so that they perfectly cancel out. But the electron...
Okay, the spin can be opposite, but it doesn't mean it has to have opposite direction of the orientation or whatever. That's random. And if you flip it upside down, then they look the exact same. What are you on about?
spin could have been this instead, or this. All of these possibilities are valid, so the rules of quantum mechanics say that the electron does all of these possible things at once until it's measured. It's not just that we don't know.
Again, when I talk about it orbiting in quadrillions, you're not understanding. It's super freaking fast. Like the Science Asylum says fast, fast. This is triple fast, okay? This is so fast that we're in quadrillions. You don't get it. If you were to go around the Earth a quadrillion times a second, you'd be having to move away from yourself in order to keep moving forward. You'd have to dodge yourself. You'd have to walk on yourself. You'd have to have a 4-story building, tall, assortment of you bouncing off of your own heads and the heads of the heads of the heads in order to get to where you're going. And of course, you don't hurt. It's like you're invincible or whatever. But the point is that you all just are flowing in these random directions, all of it in 1 second, because you're just going that fast in that confined space.
The spin is, the electron really is doing everything. The only restriction is whatever the electron is doing, the positron must do the exact opposite. This also means that when the electron is measured and its state is determined, so is the positron's. This is what we mean by entanglement, the two particle states.
Okay, no. Again, no. This is not what we mean by entanglement. This is not at all what we mean by entanglement. This is another reason why I said stop lying. Entanglement is the idea of, let's say you have a bar or a remote or something. One side of it can be seen as rotating this way. The other side can be seen as rotating this way. They're still moving at the same direction. It's only about the orientation of the device itself. Now, in regards to entangled particles, the idea is that they're connected and their functions or whatever they are doing, spin or whatever, is connected. That was the idea. Entanglement is a hoax. So when you use the word entanglement and you're just talking about similar particles that have opposite charge, you're now completely misusing terminologies. That's not entanglement, even on a theoretical level. Now you're just making things up.
Depend on each other. But how do we measure the particles and force them to do one thing? Well, for that,
This is not how you do entanglement freaking stuff. It's not about a electron and a positron. It's about photons that hit a goddamn what is it? Crystal of calcium or whatever. In the experiment, one went in one direction, one went in the other direction, and one was spin up and spin down, but it was still just photons. It wasn't electron, anti-electron. You're totally mixing up science. You're miscommunicating entirely. Somehow, you have been duped into thinking that this is a real thing. Or you're lying on purpose. Either way, you're not thinking about what you're saying before you say it. And it's a disappointment to everyone. Everyone!
use the Stern-Gerlach machine. It's essentially a strangely shaped magnet, and it's how we measure spin. The orientation of the magnets determines what axis you're measuring the spin in. For example,
see, you can say a
machines
correct motion like
we
this.
shoot in a particle with spin in the positive z direction, it will certainly go to this spot we'll call plus. If instead a particle has negative z spin, it will certainly go down to minus.
This is a true fact that you're saying But it has nothing to do with entanglement.
So this Stern Gerlach machine measures spin in the z-axis. So what happens when we put in one of our entangled particles? When the electron goes into this machine, it either goes to plus or to minus with 50-50 probability. Let's say our electron goes to plus. Well, this means it went from being in an indeterminate state to positive z spin. But what about the positron?
Listen, a differently oriented particle can just go in differently. Meaning the same electron, not an electron and a positron, but the same electron can have different orientations of spin up and spin down. Not a positron. You are miscommunicating again.
Well, the only way to conserve spin is if it's now in the negative z-spin state. When it's measured, there is a 100% chance it's minus. It has to be that way to conserve spin.
Spin up and spin down is not how you measure a positron. There's also the electromagnetic momentum of it. They're made differently. The experiment originally talked only about electrons, and their orientation being spin up or spin down is a separate thing. It's altogether separate. Nothing to do with entanglement.
But the authors of the paper realized there's something very odd about this result.
To see what's wrong with this, let's imagine that the electron and the positron carry these envelopes with them. These envelopes represent the state of the two particles. Until they're measured, both of the particles are in a superposition of being plus and minus at the same time. So both options are in the envelope.
Listen, just imagine that you have a bar magnet, okay? A little bar magnet. Any other positive force is going, if it's a north to south, they attract. If it's a south to south or a north to north, they repel. So the fact that they go up and down entirely is just random, based on the positions of them. It means they're oriented with the magnet. But what you're not really what you're really not getting about how dumb you're being right now is that machine has a kind of flux. It's not just the top is positive and the bottom is negative. There is a total difference in how that machine works. You don't get it.
But now let's move the positron to someone who's far, far away. In this analogy, opening the envelope is like measuring the spin of the electron, but that causes the wave function of the electron to collapse to just one possibility. In this case, it's plus. But what happens to the other envelope far away? Well, it needs to instantly collapse to minus, because otherwise, when the experimenter opens their envelope, they have a chance of seeing plus, which would violate the conservation of spin. But if it needs...
You realize if spin is something of one of those items, and it's happening at crazy speeds, with orientation twisting, that's happening on the order of some crazy number magnitude, unless you're accurate by a billionth of a second, your measurements don't matter for shit. They're randomly stated. You could find it at any position, and it wouldn't make any difference because you simply just did not count accurate to the billionth of a second. Maybe you did. No, I can't fucking call.
To collapse instantly when the electron is measured, then how does it know what to collapse to? It must receive intel from the faraway electron.
No. The other thing about entangled particles and the nonsense that there is the way that they're made. Usually is that if one is like, think of it as the two were together. They're like gears grinding, or two vortices. From a flow that's going up, the vortices on one side will counterclockwise, the vortices on the other side will clockwise, and that's how gears cog mesh. Once they are away from each other, they're still going to be doing that thing. That's the theory. Basic fluid dynamics.
But that message has to travel much faster than the speed of light.
Or there is a hidden variable that you're not thinking of, because of course you're not.
To get to the positron in time. And so with this argument, Einstein, Podolsky, and Rosen had shown that the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics really is non-local. Einstein had already shown this in his conference talk, but this
Lost his mind even more is what I'm really getting down to.
argument was even more decisive.
It does seem like it's the same thing, but now it's ramped up and you've got these two separate particles to do those two separate measurements, and one measurement influencing the other measurement definitely feels wrong.
Yeah, exactly. I think he really realized that it's...
And again, the moment you do the measurement and whatever else and the entanglement stops, then you can't do it again. There's no actual connection after that point, which means there was never a connection to begin with. Otherwise, you'd still be able to do things. Or what if you did like small micro adjustments? Twisting the thing gently. Then you would obviously have the ability to find something else. But again, you're orienting the magnetic field line of the little bar magnet in this machine that you've made, right? It has to be up and down. And then based on the position, it will either go up and down. You just don't understand how bar magnets work. And then you're reinterpreting it later on, knowing how bar magnets work, and still quoting the information wrong. And I don't understand how you're this confused. Again, I thought you were going to say something right. You're back into weird hippy dippy land.
measurements that are the problem in quantum mechanics.
The wave function of a single particle, or of this pair of particles, can end up spread over vast distances. That isn't itself an issue. But when the wave function collapses, the information about that collapse needs to spread everywhere the wave function is. That's what makes quantum
This is
mechanics
a false
non-local.
assumption.
The EPR paper didn't just point out this non-locality issue. They proved that there is only one local alternative theory for explaining this experiment. In this local
That they know of.
instead of the electron choosing whether to be plus or minus when it's measured, it actually makes that choice when it's still in contact with the positron. There's some random way that this plus and minus gets put into these two envelopes.
Yeah, in their conception.
Which is why the plus and minus are called hidden variables. And because this alternative theory assigns these hidden variables in a local way while they're still in contact with each other, rather than over a big distance, we call this a local hidden variable theory. Now, this local hidden variable theory is going to be able to explain this experiment really simply. Let's pass away the positron.
Wait, you're starting to accept the local variable theory? So many times before you never did.
now, when the electron is measured as a plus, it doesn't have to rush to tell the positron. The positron already knows. There is no
Yeah.
action at a distance. This local hidden variable story is so much more sensible than the quantum one.
So we're forced to accept one of two explanations for this experiment. Either non-locality, like the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics, or a local hidden variable theory. Given that non-local action at a distance contradicts relative...
Is your posture trying to make it seem like it's fine to have these theories now? Instead of... whatever.
Einstein thought this was definitive proof that the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics is wrong, and therefore there must be some local hidden variable theory that will replace it. Einstein showed us that quantum mechanics allows influences that seem to travel faster than light. But with today's video sponsor, you can have your own spooky action 120 kinds of... So even if Top's 30-day money-back guarantee, and now back to Bell's theorem. The EPR paper certainly got a lot of attention. Without asking Einstein, Podolsky leaked the paper to the press, and the story ended up in the New York Times.
Prodigious harvest of the day's intelligence is reached.
I've been so used to being
Einstein was the most famous scientist in the world,
upset
and
at
he was going
you,
after the strange
and then
but successful theory of quantum mechanics. So, of course, the press loved it. But what did scientists think of the argument itself?
it's so freaking weird because half the time they're saying things that are correct, and then they're saying things that are they're not consistent with all the other times that I have heard about these experiments, and still you're not talking about the EM field and the double slit experiment. You're still thinking wave functions. You're probably still wrong. But also, there's things that you've already said you've gotten wrong already. So I'm like, C. Or maybe a D, because you got a lot of things that are like, okay, you can explain these different experiments, you don't understand any of it.
So the reaction of the physics community was at first mixed. You know, there were some people, sort of old allies of Einstein's, who were very happy with it. Schrodinger being sort of at the top of that list. And in fact, in an attempt to clear up some of the misunderstandings that people were having about the EPR paper, Schrodinger publishes the thought experiment known as Schrodinger's cat, to sort of back up Einstein and show the kind of problem that he and Einstein had with quantum physics. Bohr, meanwhile, was like, oh my God, what the hell is this? He must be wrong. How do we show that he's wrong? Then Bohr ultimately, you know, in his sort of painful and complicated style, ends up coming up with a response to the EPR paper. This response is sort of famously obscure and difficult to understand, and I've read it in detail, and I will tell you, Bohr's reply is either nonsensical or makes some actual mistakes.
There's a very well-turned sentence which I believe Bohr took a great deal of trouble in formulating, and whose meaning is just
An influence on the very conditions which are define possible types of predictions regarding the future behavior of the system. But even at this stage, there's essentially a question of an influence of the very conditions. There's still a question of the very influence of the very conditions. Like, what's the cause for these states of matter, which then define the possible types of predictions regarding the future behavior of the system? So it's like, we don't even know how this crap is becoming the thing that is the thing that we are then noticing. I'm sorry, I'd interpreted that just fine.
absolutely obscure to me.
Bohr said in his reply to EPR, in his multiple replies to EPR, that there is no question of anything non-local going on. So
What?
the ultimate reaction of the physics community, at least in the...
Let me read that again, you son of a bitch.
Turned sentence which I believe Bohr took a great deal of trouble in formulating.
Even at this stage, there is essentially a question. There is a question. Then you're saying there's no question. You're just flat out lying at this point. Sorry,
His
what?
meaning is just absolutely obscure to me.
Bohr said in his reply to EPR, in his multiple replies to EPR, that there is no question of anything non-local going.
He said we don't even know anything about what's actually happening, much less how it's going to turn out. And you interpret that as there's no question? You can't lie to my face with evidence right in front of your face and then expect me to not be absolutely flabbergasted that you said this 2 seconds apart. It's not possible. It's like you made the script, you wrote the script, you read the script, you didn't understand what you were saying in the script.
So the ultimate reaction of
You got
the
lost in the
community,
sauce
at
with
least
this
in
shit.
the immediate years and decades following the publication of EPR and Bohr's reply in 1935, was to think that Bohr had settled it with his reply, even though people didn't really understand what Bohr had said.
2 decades later, Einstein died.
Hey, I'm not going to deny, it's a lot to figure out, and for a person who's not in the field, who cares if they don't understand what he said? But in the same time, anyone in the early field was still thinking that space-time dilates and that stuff, and it doesn't. So, and you're still thinking that today. Get over it.
Still questioning quantum mechanics, but the majority of the physics community had moved on without him. Bohr, however, never forgot about the EPR paper. In 1962, 7 years after Einstein's death, Bohr gave an interview about Einstein, and he lamented that Einstein wasted decades on fruitless thought experiments because he simply could not accept quantum mechanics. It was terrible that Einstein fell in that trap to work with Podolsky, Bohr said. Rosen is worse from my point of view. Rosen even today believes the EPR thought experiment. Podolsky has given it up, as far as I know. The whole idea is absolutely nothing when one really gets into it. You may think that I say it too strongly, but it is true. There's absolutely no problem in it. The next day, Bohr took a nap after lunch and never woke up. And so, after many decades, the Einstein-Bohr debate was over.
Bohr's authority was part of the reason the EPR paper didn't get the
It was dropped by the individuals. It wasn't over.
attention it deserved.
Clearly.
But there was another reason physicists ignored it. In the EPR experiment, both theories, Copenhagen quantum mechanics and Einstein's local hidden variable alternative, make exactly the same prediction. You get the same results either way. Debating two different interpretations of the same experimental result seemed like armchair philosophy, not real physics.
Shut up!
The Copenhagen interpretation makes good predictions, so why not just teach that and move on?
It just seems like, shut up and calculate, I think is the message that kind of gets...
No. No. There are ways of knowing reality and the truth on the actual functions of the universe. There's no reason that you have to just shut up and calculate. We got people making snowflakes out here. Who cares? I say this, and also, people put liquid nitrogen on butterfly wings. It was already dead. And I think it was the temperature that changed that color of the butterfly wings, not the movement of the liquid nitrogen. It chilled, which changed the crystalline structure, making it a more greenish blue versus the lovely blue. And I don't think they understand that yet. Let's move on.
The general attitude was, this is done. Who cares? None of this matters. It's all settled. Einstein and Bohr had a big debate about it, and Bohr won. Do you think you're smarter than Niels Bohr? Do you think
Bohr didn't... Whatever. I don't care.
smarter than Albert Einstein?
It seemed like it would be impossible to resolve this debate until another physicist turned his attention to it.
John Bell was an undergraduate student shortly after World War II in this new era of physics, and so, of course, he was taught the Copenhagen interpretation.
John Bell's doubts about quantum mechanics, by his own recollection,
I love
showed up
cookies.
basically the minute he learned it. In his first quantum mechanics class, he was, getting pretty upset with the instructors and saying, "You're being too vague. What the heck do you mean about measurement?"
Bell was never fully satisfied by the answers he got about the foundations of quantum mechanics, but when he was doing his PhD, he was encouraged to study something a little bit more respectable, and so he studied nuclear physics and went on to have a very accomplished career at CERN. But after 8 years of working in particle physics, in 1963 he took an academic sabbatical, and finally he had time to focus on his doubts about quantum mechanics.
But yeah.
I always knew that was waiting for me. He began by re-examining the old debates and the papers that most physicists had long since dismissed as philosophical distractions, including the EPR paper. After this research, he said, "I felt that Einstein's intellectual superiority over Bohr, in this instance, was enormous, a vast gulf between the man who saw clearly what was needed and the obscurantist." He realized Einstein's logic was sound. One of the two conclusions is true.
The question was, could you prove which one using an experiment?
An experiment of this sort seemed much more feasible by Bell's time. The EPR paper was the first to consider the idea of entanglement. These days, entanglement is a core feature of quantum mechanics, but Einstein had been first to even point out entanglement existed. This is why the EPR paper was...
It doesn't exist.
Because no one had made such an exotic state of matter in 1935. But in the intervening decades...
Correlation, not a causal connection. No entanglement. Stop using the word. Please.
Between Einstein's work and Bell's, between 1935 and 1964, entanglement had become a serious topic of study. By Bell's time, there were reliable ways to make it in the lab. In fact, Madame Wu had famously reproduced the EPR thought experiment as a real experiment. But simply doing the EPR experiment in real life isn't enough to tell you which explanation is correct, since both predict the same thing. But Bell wondered if there was another version of the experiment where the non-local and local theories would have to give a different result.
If you're asking that,
You realize there are a lot of experiments that you can do to think about other types of interactions and ways of defining what it is that you're looking at. You know that it's a bar magnet. You know that it has a positive and negative charge, that if there is positive to negative, it's going to attract. So at some point, if it's closer to the top of the spin up, whatever, or down, whatever, no, it's the magnetic field lines will pull up or down, depending on how close it was, with the variance being like tiny bits, and it ends up going down because it was pulled down, or up because it was pulled up, because the positive and negative forces of the magnetic fields flow with the magnetic field of the electron. You got it completely wrong. Who cares?
question and you're playing with the EPR setup, then it's like, oh, it's literally, not just figuratively, a twist, right?
Here's a simplified version of Bell's experiment. Make your entangled electron and positron again. But now, instead of just measuring them with a Stern-Gerlach machine like this, the experimenters get a choice about how to orient their machine. The three different choices are 0 degrees, 120 degrees, and 240 degrees. This is the twist on the EPR experiment. The experimenters get to choose independently. So the electron might be measured at 0 degrees, while the positron is measured at 240 degrees. If both experimenters happen to choose the same axis, then we know what happens. They have to get the opposite result as each other, to conserve spin. The interesting case is when the experimenters happen to choose different axes.
You know what happens with a polarizing lens, right? The light that goes through is what was polarized towards that direction. It changes according to the polarizing lens. Similarly, one of these machines is kind of like a polarizing lens in that it's going to just do... I'll listen.
The number we want to predict here is the disagreement rate, the probability that the electron's result is different from the positron's. At first, let's see what quantum mechanics predicts for this number. Let's say the electron is measured with the 0 degree axis and comes out as plus. Now, Now that its spin has collapsed to positive z, the positron spin needs to instantly collapse to be negative z. This is the non-local part of quantum mechanics. But what happens when this positron is measured by a machine tilted at 120 degrees? You can see that the positron spin is already almost facing the plus end of the machine, so it's much more likely to go to plus. In fact, there's a 75% chance it goes to plus and only a 25% chance it goes to minus. So the disagreement rate is 25%. And we can show that for any two different axes the experimenters select, the geometry is analogous. So they all have this same disagreement rate of 25%. Anytime the experimenters choose different axes, they will get the same outcome 75% of the time and different outcomes 25% of the time.
Now let's consider the local hidden variable alternative theory. The particles here are on a mission. Their aim? To make you believe that they're acting according to quantum mechanics, when really they're acting locally. Now we are anthropomorphizing, but I think it is really useful to just imagine them this way. We're trying to figure out if it's always possible for them to use a hidden variable theory to get the same experimental outcomes as Copenhagen quantum mechanics. Or if in this new situation, our scheming particles won't be able to fool us. You can think of it like this.
Okay.
Each of the particles is going to be asked one of three possible questions, and they need to decide on their answer while they're still together, so that
I'm probably going to have to rewatch the beginning of... Let's go back to where we start with the random directions stuff.
Literally, not just figuratively, a twist, right?
Here's a simplified version.
Okay, so I'm going to start from here in part 2, because I have to go soon, and I don't have time to finish this video. I have to get ready and everything. So far, you've stated the same stuff that I'm sure is wrong, so we'll move on.